chance to be in your beautiful city. I'm going to talk today about the transformative power of lifestyle changes. And I want to thank again Mark and the people from Gulfstream for not only the kind introduction, but for making this all possible. I think it's incredible. You know, we tend to think of advances in medicine as being a new drug, a new laser, something really high-tech and expensive. And we often have a hard time believing that the simple choices that we make in our lives each day, like what we eat, how we respond to stress, how much exercise we get, and how much love and support we have, can make such a powerful difference, but they do. And there's an emerging field called lifestyle medicine, which is lifestyle not only as preventing disease, but actually as treating it. And, you know, we often have a hard time believing that something as simple as these simple lifestyle changes can make such a powerful difference, but they do. And in our research over the last almost 40 years now, we've been using these very high-tech, expensive, state-of-the-art scientific measures to prove how powerful these very simple and low-tech and low-cost interventions can be. But to put it in simple terms, it's eat well, stress less, move more, and love more. That's really it. And everything else will be commentary. It's finally the right idea at the right time after doing this for so many years, because there's a convergence of forces. You know, there's new guidelines that came out from the American Heart Association, American College of Cardiology, American College of Physicians, that says that lifestyle medicine should be the mainstay for most people with coronary heart disease. Not something you do after you do the important stuff, but it is the important stuff. And all these forces are now converging that finally make this the right idea at the right time. The limitations of high-tech medicine are becoming clear, as I'll talk about: bypass surgery, angioplasty, stents, treatments for prostate cancer, drugs for treating diabetes don't work nearly as well as we once thought. At the same time that these simple choices that we make in lifestyle work even better than we once realized. And with the advent of Obamacare, whatever you think about it, it's really turning all the incentives on their ear. So before, the more operations you do, the more money you, if you're the doctor or the hospital, make. Now, in this environment, it's here's X amount of dollars to take care of somebody. You, the doctor or the hospital, get to keep what's left over. So the fewer operations you do, and the more you can keep people out of the hospital, the more economically advantageous it is. But if you had to boil it down to one idea, one simple idea, this has been the guiding principle for me for all these years, is to ask, what's the cause of this? And I've been showing this cartoon now for, decades, literally, that we spend so much time in medicine mopping up the floor around the sink that's overflowing without also turning off the faucet. And sometimes you do need to mop up the floor. Drugs and surgery can be life-saving in a crisis. But we also need to turn off the faucet to treat the cause, which to a large degree are the lifestyle choices that we make each day. When people get put on, for example, drugs to treat their blood pressure or high cholesterol or diabetes, and the patient says, "Doctor, how long do I have to take these drugs?" What do they say? Forever, that's right. It's like, how long do I have to mop up the floor? Forever. Like, well, why don't we turn off the faucet? And what we find is that when we can treat the underlying cause, when people change their lifestyle, that our bodies have this remarkable capacity to begin healing, and much more quickly than we had once realized, if we can treat the underlying cause. And all of these things I'll share with you were thought impossible when we began doing this work. That's, to me, part of the value of doing good science, is that you can give people new hope and new choices. And it's a disruptive technology in the same way that an electric car is, or an iPhone when it first came out. It's really changing things in a radical way, radical meaning to get to the root of something. We began by doing research on heart disease when I was a second-year medical student at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston. And I was learning how to do bypass surgery with Michael DeBakey, the heart surgeon. We cut people open, we bypass their clogged arteries, he'd tell them they were cured, and more often they'd go home and do all the things that had caused the problem in the first place. They'd smoke and not manage stress, eat junk food, not exercise, and more often than not, their bypasses would clog up, so we'd cut them open again, sometimes 2 or 3 times. And so for me, that became a metaphor of an incomplete approach, that we were literally bypassing the problem without also treating the cause, without turning off the faucet. So I took 10 men and women, put them in a hotel, all of them had really bad heart disease, and we used a test to measure the blockage of the blood flow to the heart. You can see here, this donut is a representation of the heart, and the brighter it is, the more blood the heart is getting. So around 10 o'clock here, this black area here is not getting any blood flow, and 30 days later, you can see it's virtually normal. That had never been shown before. But we only had 10 patients, there was no control group. So I went back to school, finished my MD, then did a second study. This time we had a randomized control group for comparison. We found the group that made these lifestyle changes also in about a month got better, shown in the yellow. The control group, who were making more conventional recommendations, got worse. The differences were highly significant. We published that in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And in both studies, there was a 91% reduction in the frequency of chest pain or angina. So people feel better very quickly. These underlying biological mechanisms are much more dynamic than we had once realized. When we looked at all the arteries in all the patients, we found they got more clogged after 1 year in the control group, and even more clogged after 5 years. They got worse and worse. Whereas the people who made the intensive lifestyle changes showed some overall reversal after 1 year, and even more improvement after 5 years. That had never been shown before. And again, I think these findings are really empowering people with new hope and new information that they didn't have before. We also found there was a 300% improvement in blood flow to the heart, as measured by cardiac PET scans. PET is the state-of-the-art way of measuring heart disease. You can see in the upper left, there's a frame from an X-ray movie showing where the artery is narrow or clogged. And a year later, in the upper right, where that arrow is, you can see it's less clogged. That had never been shown. And because the blood flow is a fourth power function of the diameter, even these small changes in blockages cause a 300% improvement in blood flow. And you can see on the left, blue and black is no blood flow at the beginning. In the lower right, a year later, orange and white are maximal blood flow. Again, dramatic differences simply by changing lifestyle. And 99% of the patients were able to stop or reverse the progression of their heart disease. Of course, my mom said, well, what about that other 1%? And that's another story. And yet, in the control group, 45% of them actually got worse, and 50% showed no change, and only 5% got better. So there was a dramatic difference. And the people in the control group were doing just what most doctors had recommended at the time, but it didn't go far enough even to stop the heart disease from getting worse. We also found that even though none of these patients was taking cholesterol-lowering drugs, there was a 40% reduction in their LDL. This is comparable to what you can get with drugs like Lipitor and other statin drugs, but without the multi-billion-dollar price tag that these drugs cost, and not to mention the side effects, which you can avoid. One of the interesting findings that we found, and we've seen this now in all of our studies, was that the more people changed, the better they got, at any age. I thought when I started doing this that the younger patients who had less severe disease would do better, but I was wrong. It turned out it wasn't how old or how sick they were, it was simply a function of how much they changed. The more they changed their lifestyle, the more they improved, at any age, which I think is a very powerful message to give people. And there were 2.5 times more heart attacks, strokes, bypasses, hospitalizations in the control group than in the experimental group. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of testimonials to put a human face on this. But I want to first invite up Jeff Adams, who lives here in Savannah. He sent me a note when he heard that I was coming to lecture here to talk about his experience. Jeff, you want to come on down for a second? And, you know, it's nice to show statistics and charts and graphs and so on. The stories are powerful, too. And I'd like Jeff to just give you a 1-minute overview of his. You want to just, hey, nice to see you. We just met 15 minutes ago.
Hello, welcome. First of all, I am the chairman of Heartbeats for Life in Georgia here, so there is a support group to help this. Okay, it's here in Savannah. We're doing it all the time. We have monthly meetings at the Southwest Chatham Library. Okay, a while ago, I had gone to my doctor for an annual physical checkup. He says, anything going on with you? I said, well, you know, I did have a little chest discomfort, but it wasn't a pain, it wasn't sharp, I don't think anything really. He said, well, you're 50 plus years old, why don't we go ahead and get a test, and we'll have a baseline so we can see how you're doing years from now. I said, that's fine. So we did that, called me back again a day later, he said, go ahead and do more tests. I said, okay. Called me back a day later again, he said, go ahead and do more tests. I said, what's going on? He said, well, I think I found something, we aren't sure, do more tests. Okay. So I do all that. He calls me in his office, and basically, to make it as short as I can, he says, you have a very serious heart condition, no bypass, no stents can do anything for you at all, you need a heart transplant, and right now, you only have about 3 to 6 months to live, and heart transplant is going to take at least a year to 14 months, so you're done, basically. He says, go home and prepare yourself, and you know, take care of your affairs and that kind of stuff, because there's no chance. So I was in the wholesale and retail book business. I went to my bookstore. I knew we had some books on heart disease. I picked up Dr. Ornish's Reversing Heart Disease. I read that book that day. Okay? The next day, I told my wife, I said, from now on, I'm doing the cooking, which was fine with her. Okay? And 2 months later, the doctor called me. He says, "What's going on with you?" Because my doctor and I were friends. I says, "I feel pretty good. I changed my diet." He said, "Well, that's not going to do nothing." I said, "I went back in for more tests and everything else." And he got back to me and said, "There must have been something wrong with the machines the first time we did the test, because this is getting better, and that's impossible, medically impossible." A couple of months later, I did more tests and stuff like that. And he says, "You're a medical miracle because you're so much better," and so on and so forth. And I was. And my cholesterol originally was 280 something, and it went down to 138. All right, I lost a few pounds, not many, because it wasn't that heavy. All right, all the other blood pressure and all that kind of stuff went down to normal. Okay. All right. The last thing I will tell you when we get off the stage is the fact that at our last meeting last month, we had a guy stand up. He said, "I've been on a program for nine weeks. In 9 weeks, my cholesterol has gone from 302 to 137. Yes, wow. And he said, "I've been diabetic for 10 years, that's completely gone." He said, my blood pressure and medications are all gone." He says, "I lost 20-some pounds." And he said, "But the best thing is how good I feel." And the last thing I'm going to say, with the great help to Dr. Ornish in his book originally, because he saved my life, obviously, because that was 13 years ago. The last thing I'm going to tell you is a phrase that I like, and that is, the only real failure is a failure to try. So if this works, do it.
That's why I love doing this work, why I'm so passionate about doing it after almost 40 years, is that I hear stories like this all the time. And I think that's why we're here, is to empower and help each other. I remember when I did my first studies, they said the same thing, the machine must be broken, there must be something wrong with it. When you're doing something that doesn't quite fit, people have a hard time. I'm going to show you two other short 90-second testimonials from two other people. One was from a documentary called Escape Fire. And this is the guy who was in that study 25 years later talking about it.
25 years ago, I had 5 restaurants in San Francisco. It was a great life. I smoked 6 cigars a day, 10 cups of coffee, a lot of wine. It was wonderful. And I had a massive heart attack. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. I could hardly just about walk 3 steps, and I'd have to stop and rest. I was popping 20 or 30 nitros a day. But then Dean Ornish was starting his program to see if he could reverse heart disease through lifestyle change. And he went to my doctor and asked if he could approach me. He told Dean, "How long is the program?" He said it was a year. And my doctor told him he wouldn't recommend taking me because he didn't think I would live the year. So he figured I was going to die because I was in such bad shape. And now, 25 years later, I'm in pretty good shape.
This is a guy who hasn't had any chest pain now for it's actually been 28 years since this was made 3 years ago. And he was also being considered for a heart transplant as well. In fact, we have a number of people who were on the heart transplant list, tried this, and was able to get it. It's kind of the ultimate high-tech, low-tech contrast. Like, what's more radical, a heart transplant or walking, meditating, eating vegetables, and quitting smoking and loving it? So the patient did, but his doctor died during that time, unfortunately. But just show one more 90-second clip. This is from a guy in West Virginia. We trained 10 sites in West Virginia, which has been #1 in the country in heart disease. Georgia's not too far behind. And it's like, if I can make it in West Virginia, I can make it anywhere. Just
I'm no longer using a cane or a wheelchair. In November of 2001, I was using a cane to walk with, and I had to have the humiliating experience of riding a wheelchair around Walmart. Now, I didn't like that. I wasn't going to settle for that. I knew there must be a better way. And thank God I found a better way. I no longer have to take my diabetes medication. In fact, my total medication has been reduced by 75%. I had trouble getting to my mailbox without having chest pain. But now I am walking at least 2 miles a day. I ride my stationary bike anywhere from 8 to 10 miles a day.
And I want to emphasize again, these are not best case. These are representative of what happens when we make these changes. That's why I love doing this work. It's really gratifying. So then we looked at prostate cancer. We did a study in collaboration with the Chair of Urology at Sloan Kettering and the Chair of Urology at UCSF to say, we found we could reverse heart disease. Can we reverse early stage prostate cancer? And so we took 93 men, all of whom had early stage prostate cancer, and who decided not to be treated conventionally with surgery or radiation for reasons unrelated to the study. It used to be called watchful waiting, or sometimes now active surveillance. Then we could randomly divide them into two groups. Ask one group to make lifestyle changes, but not the other. And then we could see the effects of lifestyle changes alone without being confounded with the usual chemo and radiation and surgery. And what we found is that PSA, which is a marker for prostate cancer, went up or got worse in the control group, went down or got better in the group that made these lifestyle changes. And those differences were highly significant. And they occurred in direct proportion to the degree of lifestyle change. In other words, the more people changed their diet and lifestyle, the lower their PSA levels went. We then took some of their serum and we added it to a standard line of prostate tumor cells growing in tissue culture. And we found that the prostate tumor was inhibited 70% in the group that made these lifestyle changes, but only 9% in the control group. And in one of the coolest slides, we found the more people changed their lifestyle, the more it directly inhibited the prostate tumor from growing. And we can actually measure it with a new test called MR spectroscopy. And you can see in the red, the tumor is beginning to shrink, the tumor activity is diminishing, as well as the PSA coming down. So this was the first and still the only randomized controlled trial showing that lifestyle changes alone may slow, stop, and even reverse the progression of men with early stage prostate cancer. And if it's true for prostate cancer, it will almost certainly be true for breast cancer as well. And we're just beginning a new study to look at the effects of breast cancer now as well. And none of the patients who made these changes needed surgery or radiation during the first year, but 6 of the control group patients did. So we wondered what some of the mechanisms might be to help explain, why do people get better? In such a short time, just by changing lifestyle. And so we looked at their gene expression, and we found that over 500 genes were changed in just 3 months. Imagine that. Turning on the good genes that protect us, turning off or downregulating the genes, particularly the ones that cause prostate, breast, colon cancer, and which are the most common forms of cancer, were turned off. Just like that, in just a few months. Isn't that amazing? This is what's called a heat map. You can see on the left, it's mostly red, and then on the right, it's mostly green. Red is turned on, green is turned off from a geneticist, and along the right column are all these different genes that cause cancer. In just 3 months, you can downregulate hundreds of genes, almost 500 genes that cause cancer. Okay? You don't have to wait decades to show these changes. That's how dynamic these underlying mechanisms are. We then looked at the aging process itself. There was a study that was done by Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn, who won the Nobel Prize 4 years ago for discovering telomeres and telomerase. Telomeres are the ends of our chromosomes that actually control how long we live. And as we get older, they tend to get shorter. And as our telomeres get shorter, our lives get shorter. And the risk of premature death from pretty much everything, whether it's heart disease, diabetes, most forms of cancer, dementia, go up as your telomeres get shorter. And she had done a wonderful study where they found that women who were under chronic emotional stress, because they were caregivers of either parents with Alzheimer's or kids with autism, the more stress they reported feeling, and the longer they felt that way, the shorter their telomeres were. But what was interesting to me about this, and they, by the way, they calculated the difference between the high levels of stress and the low levels of stress, was the high levels of stress had a 9 to 17 years shortening of their lifespan. That's a lot. But what I found most interesting was that it wasn't an objective measure of stress. It was the women's perception of it that determined its effect on their telomeres and then thus on their longevity. In other words, if you feel stressed, you are stressed. And you could have 2 women who are in very comparable life situations, but one was coping with it better. They were meditating, they were exercising, they had more love and support in their lives, they were eating healthier. And so even if we can't control the environment that we find ourselves in, we have a lot that we can do about how we react to it. So you may be in the same job, the same family, the same environment, the same school, the same business as somebody else. But if you're coping with it better and you're not feeling the stress because of that, then you can accomplish even more without having a reduction in your lifespan. So we were at a scientific meeting together, and when they presented these data, and I had lunch with them, I said, you know, if bad things make your telomeres shorter, maybe good things make them longer. So we did a study, and we found that when we put people on our lifestyle program, the enzyme, the telomerase, increased by 30% in just 3 months. And last year we published the first study showing we could actually make the telomeres longer. Not only could we help keep them from getting shorter, but we could actually make them longer. They got 10% longer on the left in the group that made these lifestyle changes, whereas on the right, going down, the control group, their telomeres actually got shorter. This was the first and still the only control study showing that anything, including drugs, can actually lengthen your telomeres. I mean, if this was drug X that could make your telomeres longer, it'd be a multi-billion-dollar drug overnight. But it's the same lifestyle program that does all of these things. It's not like there's one set of healthy lifestyle recommendations for reversing heart disease, a different one for prostate cancer or diabetes or breast cancer or your genes. It's the same lifestyle changes for all of these things. And the more you change, the better you get. We found the more people change their lifestyle, the longer their telomeres got. And so our genes are a predisposition, but our genes are not our fate. And so often I hear people say, oh, I just got bad genes, there's nothing I can do about it. Mr. Burns mentioned